Chapter 5, when Jesus speaks his Sermon on the Mount, when he talks to all those who are following, he talks about how we are the salt of the earth, how we are the light of the world. Now, salt and light aren't, powerful as far as, wealthy and that kind of thing. These are things that are simple. These are things that are abundant. But salt and light have influence. We all know that just a little bit of salt can make a big difference in a dish, right? I don't know about you, but I'm supposed to eat less salt. But so a little bit of salt in my diet makes a big difference. And the same thing with light. You can go into the darkest place in the world and just a little bit of light will make a big difference. By the way, how many of you have ever been to Mammoth Cave, Kentucky? But a handful have, yeah. The reason I mention that, darkest place in the world, okay? Because they took us on this tour and they have emergency lights and all that, but you go in, maybe some of you remember this, that they take you into this one part in this big room and they say, okay, we're going to turn out all the lights. Now you got to cover your watches, and the kids are wearing those little shoes that light up, and anything else that can make a light, let's cover it up. And we sat in there for 30 seconds. And we were all packed in there, real tight. But they turned every light off, and you could not see the person standing next to you. But then he lit a candle. And that one candle just lit up that huge room, and you could see everything. That's what the Bible describes as influence. That God wants us to have influence, not power. Influence is powerful, but God holds the power. We are to have influence. And I want to share with you tonight that influence is more powerful than you and I think. And I also want to make sure that you and I consider, are we on the good side of influence? Because while we can influence others, guess what? We can be influenced by others too. And that's what this story of Shadrach and Meshach and Abednego are all about. But I just want you, as we're going through this, to think about the areas where you already have influence. Let me ask you, how many of you here are grandparents? You're a grandparent. I bet I see a lot of grandparents here tonight. Okay? Some of you are parents. Raise your hand. Okay? If you're a parent. How about at work? Do you work with other people? Raise your hand. There you go. Have you got neighbors? Raise your hand. That's right. So there's people all around our lives that we have influence over. Now, I mentioned grandparents first because I say that out of respect for my grandmother. I called her Mimi growing up. Mimi lived in our house. This is my mother's mother while we were growing up. And she had a tremendous influence on me. A bit of a story here. A few years ago, a psychologist named Ruth Farenda did an interesting experiment. That's why I brought my little thing up here. Don't worry about the picture. I just need a poster board. She brought in groups and did a very simple experiment. She said, what I want you to do is when I point to the line on there of these three lines that are the longest, I want you to raise your hand. Okay? So she said A, B, or C. Now, most of you, if you have your glasses on tonight and sitting too far away, you know that C is the longest line. Okay? But here's the trick to her experiment. Only one out of the 10 people in the room was actually a real guest, if you will, a subject. The other 9 were setups. And they were given instructions that when she pointed to the line B, that they would all raise their hands to see what the one would do. Would the one go along with the crowd? Or would the one say, well, I don't care what those other people think. C's obviously the longest line. Well, she got some very significant results back from her study. What percentage do you think of the people went along with the crowd? You might want to take a guess.
80%.
75%. And by the way, this study has been replicated over the years, and it's a consistent number. That when they do that test under those conditions, when the other 9 are raising their hand, that one person's going, well, it sure looks like C to me, but hey, I'll go with the crowd. Right? That's part of our human nature. That's part of our sinful nature. And we need to be prepared for that, because you and I, if we're the 1 out of 10, there's a strong chance that we could go with the majority, even if we know it's wrong. So we have to be ready for that. So Shadrach and Meshach and Abednego give us a great example here. We all know what Paul talked about in Romans.